let's go back to 1995. In Canada, we started a learning network called the Tele-Learning at the time. It was the very early days of the internet, when the internet became public somehow, became visible to most of us. So at the time, it felt like so much of a big thing, the internet in education, that I was very much reminded of a book by a colleague from Alberta, who was talking about thoughtfulness in teaching. So the group that I started building, we call it TAC. And you can almost see it over there. It's like a cloud, It's like a little cloud. And what you see in that cloud, the T goes for tradition, the vertical line, and then a transition. Like it was the very beginning of a transition for all of us in education. And then you had the A, and it was the word in French, apprentissage, learning. And then it meant also that we could do it when we were not in the same room, teacher and students. It meant tele-learning. That was the title of the network. And then the C, for the C, it meant community, knowledge, construction. And the T, well, it was technology coming up. And technology that could bring some transformation. So it was almost a very first vision of what it could be all about. So our group TAC, in English we translated it by Technology for Advanced Collaboration Among Teachers. So you see the very beginning of what we're going to talk about. And then we started developing, well, Marlene, that you saw, you did not hear Marlene, but you may have heard her in June. Marlene was in charge of a research group on school. Okay, the research team, what was happening in schools with tele-learning. And then I was in another group called Educating Educators. It had to do with teacher education and professional development. And also Carl was in the first theme, about theory, about it all. But somehow we started crossing paths as we went along. So we came up with this kind of a model. So you see, the emphasis could be on teaching, the teacher being center stage, or it could be on learning. So that was the continuum that we were seeing, from teaching to the learner, a bit more. It was very much learner-centered at the time. And I remember, my early conversation with Marlene when she was putting the focus on community. She could not really get at what I was thinking about, which was more the learner himself or herself. And I could not really get to what she was trying to say in terms of the community. But that was the beginning of a conversation. And this model, it had to do with first trying to understand what the internet was about, how we can access to it. And we are still trying to understand with all the new technologies coming up. And then as we understand what the internet can do and all the tools we can use with it, new possibilities were starting to emerge. But then we started to see that those new possibilities will have to introduce new routines. If new routines were not going to happen in the classroom, well, not much really could make a difference. And then, of course, there was a lot of talk at the time with respect to project-based learning. That was one way to start turning the classroom around, putting the emphasis more on the learner than the teacher. So project-based learning was there very much. And then in between, we had also inquiry-based learning. We had problem-based learning. These were different possibilities. And then we had collaborative knowledge building. That seems to be at the very top, And it still is today. For me, there is nothing that goes beyond knowledge building. It's, when we are there, well, it's where it is. It's what it's all about. But the whole point is, how do we get there? So I'm going to use activity theory a little bit to talk about this and reflect back on our own journey. And I'm just going to throw a few conceptual elements about it. Well, when a community has an activity, well, for it to be a community, it needs to have a motive. It needs to have an object. Some will say it needs to have a goal. This is what we'll call, in activity theory, first stimulus. Remember, activity theory goes back to Vygotsky. And at the time, well, Vygotsky was mandated by, I don't know if it was the education minister at the time or the premier of Russia or whatever, the Soviet Union, to bring to education a social dimension. But, it was still Pavlov world, and the word stimulus was very much around. So Vygotsky used that term of first stimulus and second stimulus. So I'm going to play with that a little bit. So the object of a community's knowledge-building activity, one way we can formulate it today, and it reflects what we're trying to do in Quebec, is student achievement for success in the knowledge age. It goes back a little bit to what Nancy was talking about, our own definition of knowledge building. For that to happen, a community has to face the contradictions within and between activity systems, meaning there is one activity within the community, and as the community evolves through new tools, tools could be concepts, tools could be instruments, could be artifacts. As a community evolves toward a new activity, this is what we start looking into. We look at the contradiction that the community faces. And there is a lot of that in what's happening probably here in Singapore, what's happening in Quebec, what's happening in Ontario, what's happening in Hong Kong. It's a community trying to transform itself, transform its activity. And along the way, it has to face contradictions and resolve the contradictions. So this is what we call often a double bind. So the whole point is for a community to solve a double bind, it has to find second stimuli that could help. So I'm going to get into the second stimuli right now. A second stimuli for us in Quebec was deep understanding. And somehow it was also what I call a second stimuli for UNESCO. When UNESCO came up with that book in 2011, they came up with only 3 teacher competencies in the use of ICT. The first one being, you have to know the technology. Second, you have to engage kids into deep understanding. And then you move to knowledge creation. So the whole point about the second stimuli being deep understanding, well, it's a bit easier for teachers to grasp it with the students, and for the students to grasp it, and also for the parents of the students, and for the school superintendent and other people. So a second stimuli helps a community transform its activity toward the first stimulus. So it's quite important in the process that we go through when we do that. Of course, we can consider the knowledge building principles as a second stimuli also. The scaffolds, the knowledge forum scaffolds, could be considered a second stimuli. It means helping the community, helping its members transform its activity. So if we look at what it's doing, you saw the title of the presentation very briefly. It's boundary crossing and defining moments. So boundary crossing, here what you see 2 activity systems on the left. You have the activity system 1, which is the status quo, where things are within a community at a special time. And then here's the the second activity system toward which the community may be moving, try to achieve the first stimulus. So what you see here, between the first activity and the second activity, there is what we call the second stimulus. Deep understanding. Of course, you can put the knowledge building principles here, or you could put the scaffolds, the knowledge forum scaffolds. These are three different stimuli that could help a community transform its activity from activity 1 to activity 2. So for instance here, what it means in terms of division of labor, going back to the first two triangles in the hourglass I presented, division of labor is quite different if you start building on the agency of the student rather than being engaged in a teacher-centered classroom. So there is a big shift here, moving from this first activity to the second one. And my point here is to say the identification of stimuli, second-level stimuli, will be extremely important for you for this move toward fully actualizing the possibilities of a knowledge-building classroom. I'll give the example of the remote network school in Quebec. Well, Quebec is a very large province like Ontario in Canada, and you know how big Canada is, And this project had to do with the small remote schools distributed all over. And most of the population in Quebec is just along these lines here. So Quebec City is here where I live, and Montreal here. Almost everybody is here, and very few people all over. So it's very different than what Singapore is, I'll tell you. So here's a small village with one church, one school. And often what's happening is that the quality of education was questioned, It still is today, but it was even more at the time. And the deputy minister started asking, can ICTs help keep remote schools open, the small ones? So it became a matter of quality of education for him. If you were to ask the teacher, the one teacher or the two teachers who were working in that small schools, they will not challenge whether there was quality of education. They were sure that they were giving the best they could give to their students. But you started seeing a first tension here between the Minister of Education having to distribute money all over Quebec because we apply very much the equality of access principle. It's very important. And, but to distribute the money equally everywhere and to have enough resources. Of course, when you only have 2 or 3 kids with the same age, it's not much interaction that will happen over time. There is not much diversity of interaction, And also, if you only have 1 or 2 or 3 teachers in those small schools, it's not like having 10 or 12 teachers, and all the energy that comes with it and all the intelligence that's come with it. So what we did, we used a design experiment approach. We tried to start with the best model we can come up with. And, knowledge building was right there. We knew that was the top for us. So the idea is that let's put it out there first. As researchers, we say, okay, the best model we can offer, we cannot deprive the Ministry of Education from our understanding of what could be done in the most important manner in order to improve the quality of education and move toward, the 21st century and all that. So we said knowledge building, although we knew it was a long haul, getting there. But, here in 2015, 2016, what you see here, it is a poster that each classroom puts in front of the door. When you enter the classroom, this is what you see. So what it says, we are a network classroom, and each of the small stars, it's one of the knowledge forum scaffold, the basic 6 scaffolds. It took us some time before to be able to say it so clearly, on a poster to everyone coming in that school, but primarily to the kids who were entering that classroom every day. And so we distributed about 250 of these. So meaning 250 classrooms or so had this poster in the front of their door. Well, you may be wondering what's happening in 2016, 2017. Well, now we ask students to draw their understanding of what's happening in their classroom when we work together. So here's the winning drawing. So kids, their school and other schools around holding hands. Okay, that's the connection. Often we hear the word e-learning or tele-learning at the time, but for us it was more network learning. So knowledge building had to happen within and beyond network learning. So you see a very, very strong sense of connection that this kid illustrated. And other classrooms voted on the final shortlist. And this is the one that won the competition, meaning that it grabbed the imagination, or maybe it reflected a little bit of the experience of a number of kids in the different classrooms when they engage in knowledge building, when they work collaboratively with kids from another classroom. So this year, this is it. So the drawing was developed throughout the year, and now the newest poster is this one. Of course, we just shape it up a little bit, but that's the idea. It's the idea of one student reflecting on the experience of his classroom, and other students, selecting that one drawing on the left to capture the experience. Of course, you see more the sense of connection compared to this one, where we were the ones thinking that it was time to put the knowledge forum basic scaffolds, giving them a star role, Okay. So just to give you a feel, I won't have as many pictures as Nancy, because we do most of our work we do online. It's a team of graduate students distributed in different universities of Quebec who will support online the teachers whenever they feel a need to talk or just to share an experience they have had with the students. They can come online. It's through a video conferencing system, and we have a presence from morning to the evening on that. And so on the left, you see 2 students working together from the same classroom, but they are working on knowledge forum with some other students from another classroom in another school. And sometimes it goes as far as working with students from Africa. Kids, they speak French. You probably recognize my accent also because I teach in French. And so on the Francophone side, on the Anglophone side, we have the Knowledge Building International Project, but on the Francophone side, we have the equivalent. And here, it's some work between a little Jesuit college in an African country, working with our students. And it's not learning about one's culture by talking about culture itself. It's learning about one's culture through how we approach learning objects, how we approach problems. So the Remote Network School initiative has been going on for quite a while. So it is a partnership between the government, university, Now we have 4 universities involved with it, and also schools. You know, we have been going on for 15 years. There are more than 250 schools involved, 32 school boards, and there is a knowledge transfer agency that's highly instrumental in making this whole thing happen. It's not just a partnership between the government, universities, and schools. It is also mediated by a knowledge transfer agency. They work in different sectors, including health, business, and also now education. They have been doing that with us for the past 15 years. If we look at the boundary crossing that's happening, so basically this is what you see. You'll read faster than I can speak, so I'll let you read this. So boundary crossing means, you know, starting doing the activity we're engaged in a different manner than we used to. So it was like this for us as researchers, having to deal with the knowledge transfer agency, because we thought we could of course deal ourselves with people who work in schools. But then this agency proved to be quite instrumental. At the classroom level, this is what it means. To adopt shared collaborative online spaces. And we had only one, and it was Knowledge Forum for Written Discourse. So somehow we went beyond classroom-based knowledge building by having 2 classrooms engaged in discussing a problem. It meant teachers had to meet with one another, trying to identify what could be an area of the curriculum that their students could start working on, but without defining too specifically what it would be all about. So we added an extra level of difficulty that way. And it also meant for the teachers and the students and the parents, you know, to open the online talks to researchers' analysis, because we'll provide often feedback on what was happening, and teachers would require that. But what we will say to a teacher is not what we will say to the school principal. I'm not saying that we will contradict ourselves. I'm just saying that there were information, there were data that concerned the teacher, because it's his or her level of responsibility, whereas other data was important for the school principal or for the school district superintendent, or even for the deputy ministry office. So we're very respectful of that. So it meant classroom engaging into knowledge building at an international level also. But most of the activity would happen, of course, within the same school district, because they share more. It's their home community somehow. And there are more activities that bind them together. But also there was this international dimension that started to happen. And then we started to have teachers, and it goes back to what Nancy was talking about also. It's when teachers start teaching other teachers. One formula that worked very well was to have teachers working 1 day a week with other teachers and doing knowledge building on a 4-day basis. Well, I'm not saying all the time, but you know, when a teacher was talking with a teacher who was taking a leadership role or a mentorship role, he or she knew that this teacher was also working in a classroom. It was not a person taking a different role, and this approach has been extremely important. Now let's move to some defining moments. What I mean by defining moments, how our community slowly engaged into knowledge building, and what were critical moments that started shaping, defining our community as a community that has a practice of knowledge building. So first, I'm coming back to this notion of a second stimulus, breaking away from isolation when engaging their respective classroom into collaborative learning, knowledge building activity. So this is how the teacher reformulated that. I mentioned to you a few second level stimuli, like deep understanding, but basically, through the different analysis we conducted, interviews and so on, for teachers, it meant to break away from isolation within their own experience. It was even more important than deep understanding. Of course, deep understanding played a role, but breaking the isolation was extremely important for them. And then another one was teachers' shift of attention to pedagogical intents instead of primarily focusing on digital technology. It's getting so busy in terms of new technologies coming out. But for teachers, what it means is to put pedagogy first. So that was a defining moment. Another one, let's go on the student side, is students' behavior that shifted teachers' beliefs regarding what they could achieve when provided the opportunity. So we noticed that very, very early in teachers' discourse. That was a very encouraging sign for them when they could see their students rising above the occasion, or rising to the occasion. So that moved the teachers quite a bit, and I see the students here. Yeah, you play an important role in that. Defining moments also of teachers' shared transformative agency devoted to online classroom activity. We identified two of these. Teachers engaging in co-design for the classroom to engage in collaborative inquiry. I referred to that a bit earlier. They will walk through the video conferencing system to plan, but to plan in a kind of an open manner, but in a concerted manner also. And also students manifesting exemplary behavior at the onset of collaboration with peers from other schools. It's not that obvious, We hear a lot about collaborative technologies, of course, but we know that collaborative technologies are only a support. It's the interaction that goes on, and the quality of this interaction that would be persuasive to teachers. So we noticed that, and that became a defining moment. Another one, at a more abstract level, but nevertheless quite important. It was very important for the Ministry of Education and also for the teachers and the school principals, but primarily for teachers, is that we conducted quite a long-term study. We used the PEARLS, which is a reading comprehension test for fourth graders, an international test. At the elementary or primary level is the equivalent of the PISA, for the 15 years old. But, PEARLS is devoted to reading comprehension. So from 2003 to 2010, we look at the results, and we had control groups all the way. And you see the red line, EER, means the remote network schools. For all the participating schools, they were below the control group. But starting in June 2005, they were like the other. The very last year, well, it was the last year we could get that the funding was stopping for that, and it meant gathering a lot of tests, so we could not continue. But nevertheless, for many years here, at least those students from the remote network schools where quality of education was somehow questioned, they reached the level of the students from the control groups. So that was extremely persuasive for the government to continue funding, because, to have an initiative lasting 15 years, and it's still going on. It's transforming itself, but it's still going on. It's It's exceptional, let's say. And this study was important, and it has been a defining moment. Now let's move to some knowledge-building defining moments. Students surpassing teachers by far regarding the number of content-related questions asked to one another during online discourse. You know, often on the knowledge forum, you see a question. It may be the teacher who will put the question in. It may be the result of conversation with the students or not. And then we may see on knowledge forum a reproduction of what's happening in the classroom, like a teacher raising a question, each student responding to the question, you know. But what's important when you have a 3-layer, a 4th-layer conversation, kids responding to other kids, asking new questions, that sort of thing. So we saw that happening. And it was through the work of researchers bringing back those results to the teachers, you know, that it helped build the knowledge-building activity, I will say. In the activity here, I mean, you know, the activity of the community. Students asking a broad variety of questions that call for long answers on the part of their peers. That was extremely important, and it is also a new activity, you know, coming back to where so often, you know, we ask questions that are calling for short answers and right answers also, whereas development questions give more possibilities for idea to emerge and a variety of responses to be provided. You know, when we have a complex problem, we may have more than one good answer. So more of this happening meant that the knowledge-building activity was being constructed. And then the third element also that I'm putting forward here is quite important. It's low achievers demonstrating best individual progress during collaborative inquiries aimed at deeper understanding of a question or a problem. So this was recently published, by the way, but we have had this result for a number of years, but we capture it in this graphic. So what you see, the control group here, it's the top one, the stars here. But what's important here, the group four is with the squares. It was a moderately active group, but nevertheless, it's the group that made the most significant jump. And it was a group of low achievers. So we may say that when students are, the control group here, the students were pretty at a high level, but still they made some progress. But look at the curve here for them. So this was measured through before and after interviews on some specific problems that require explanation. If we look at the knowledge-building questions, so here are some of the questions that may be asked. You know. Why should we save water in Quebec? We have so much water, you know. So if we look at long answers versus short answer seeking questions, so the data we provided was showing clarification questions were being asked, questioning facts, opinion, and explication asking. And we also provided some explanation levels. So this was the data, the knowledge-building data that we kept sending to teachers anytime they provided that. We provided that anytime they wanted it. Then the last part, I'm going to talk a little bit about the contradiction, because I mentioned that earlier. Through activity theory, we look at the contradiction. And it's a matter of facing the contradiction and moving beyond the contradictions. So the contradictions we see between a classroom activity system and a knowledge building community activity system, well, what's difficult in the act of transformation, one's activity, it's to move from idea expression to idea improvement as the norm. In the role of being a student, we know so well how to be a student. We know how to look into the teacher's eyes, trying to understand what are his or her expectations and trying to feed back the right answers. To move away from that, it's still something that's an ongoing challenge. The way to deal with that is to make that explicit in the classroom. There are times where students have to give the right answer, that the right answer is expected. When is it that the problem is complex enough that there are many possibilities to explore different approaches to answer a question? So to bring idea improvement as the norm in a classroom, this is a very advanced level for a classroom to reach. It can be done. That is what's so great about it. Another one is information gathering. Now with the internet, it's so easy to go and find information, versus local data gathering by students. So this is still a challenge, in the network we have. To develop experiments, to talk to people, to gather data locally in order to explore a question has to be done more. It has to become more part of the activity of a classroom. And then another one, it's a pretty tricky one. It's the use of I understand or I versus we in a classroom. It's very basic in terms of interaction. So often, maybe very different here, but in Quebec, I still do supervise student teachers. I go in classroom, and what does the student teacher say? Okay, do this, bring that to me. Of course, I want this, to change the language from I want this to here where we are, what are we going to do next, what do we want out of this? Just the use of the we is a very basic ingredient in day-to-day interaction in the classroom that could help make a difference when it comes to knowledge building. Another one is to have rise above notes written early in the process. We know it's there, the affordance is, we perceive it, the knowledge forum offers it nicely. The new version you'll see quite great for rise above notes, but the very fact that one's note was disappearing from the screen. Of course, we could say to a student, you can bring it back on the screen, was a hurdle. The new version now, when you open the Rise Above note, you can still see the notes that contributed to the Rise Above note. They are there. So this is extremely important, because students are so much used to see their work somewhere, and a contribution is something important that the student will write, or that a small group of students will write. That to see that disappear in a Rise Above note was kind of tricky. So right now, we very much welcome Knowledge Forum 6, and in Quebec, we use Knowledge Forum 6 on a restricted basis right now, but we are about to make the move, hopefully by January. And one key reason for that is to be able to work with Rise Above notes earlier in the process without students feeling sad that their note has disappeared. from the screen. And then we are still with the first basic KF scaffold, my theory, new information, I need to understand, of course, all this is written in French, compared to the last three basic ones. Putting our knowledge together, it's more and more easy to do. But a better theory, oh, this is a hard one for students. And this theory cannot explain, oh boy, this is even harder, So how do we move in these directions? So these are our challenges. So I'll come back to the two activity graphics. I'll look here at the contradiction between the researcher's activity and school board IT department's activity system. I really want to say that. When we began, in 2003, it was, Knowledge Forum was a very rare platform to support collaboration. But now you have so many tools that will claim they are collaborative tools. The Google Suite is a collaborative tool. Of course, email is a collaborative tool. But for a group, right now, what we see, and a difficulty we have has to do with, let's look here, the rule of the IT department. They want to try new attractive digital tools and platforms. And here, as researchers, we want to stick with Knowledge Forum. So these are two different activity systems. What we are doing at our end and what they are trying to do at their end. So we should not underestimate that right now. And this is why it's so important to put forward the pedagogical intents, what we try to achieve in a classroom, what's important, what are the tools that will allow us to move in that direction, because there is a lot of technology around. It's getting extremely busy. So I see this as a contradiction. Let's say here that the first activity system is the university-based research and intervention team that I'm talking about, but it is also, I could replace university-based IT here by some school principals, some schools, some teachers, some school superintendents, who believe in knowledge building, but to face within their own organization. IT departments are extremely important. What's their role in choosing the tools that are being used into classrooms? So this is an issue we need to keep being attentive to. I don't know if it resonates here in your own context, but it is something we have to be careful and working with. Now let's look at another contradiction between the school board activity system and the remote network schools activity system. I'm just going to take an issue we have, school principals. What the school board will do often is to give a school principal multiple assignments, new project, new initiative coming in, new priorities. And it clashes with the more enduring project, the most enduring initiatives. So this is something also that we keep being very attentive, and we solve a contradiction at that level and a new one will arise, and it keeps being a challenge for scalability. And then here we have another one, and it comes right back to knowledge building itself. As a rule, we want sustained interaction, we need goal negotiation, we need scaffolding, and also there are other rules applying within and among the school districts, you know. Cooperation is important, collaboration is important between schools and classrooms, but also there are competing teaching approaches, pedagogies. So it's something to be very, very attentive. So I kind of look forward to the PISA next week. You know, December 6th, they are coming out with the results. And you know that the 15 years old last year had to pass a test that included collaborative problem solving. And the student had to chat with a little robot, the robot sometimes was quite intelligent, sometimes was behaving quite improperly, intellectually speaking. And then the student had to find resolution into that. And this was the example that was given, you know, in the OECD information provided about it. So I see this as an incentive, and I don't know how you're going to respond here to that. But let's see that it could just help, it could become a defining moment, the result that our kids will get next week when it comes to that. And I will end by saying that a final challenge, it's the personal mobility, you know, school principal changing, teachers changing schools, and often, you know, second stimuli needs to keep being formulated if we want to move toward knowledge building. And there was a big shift in our team in Quebec last year, and it happened. And I'm going to just to show you a reconstitution. So the team that started to facilitate the process started to talk about, you can almost, from English, you can almost uncover the meaning of this. Now, the second stimuli is called collective investigation in a knowledge-building mode. Well, could not be against it, could not be fully for it, you know. It's close to collaborative knowledge building, period. But, you know, collective investigation in a knowledge building mode. So this was the understanding of the leading person on the support team. Well, finally, what I would just add, keep thinking about where you want to go with it, the main motive. Keep thinking about second stimuli that will help people move beyond the double binds that their own activity system, which is interacting with other activity system, find themselves into.